Welcome everyone, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, to this commemoration of twin anniversaries in the margins of the 7th biennial meeting of the state parties to the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons. This year, we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the POA and the Firearms Protocol, the two instruments that established the international framework to reduce the illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons and to address the painful impact of armed violence around the world. My name is Daniel de Torres, and I am the director of the Small Arms Survey in Geneva, which also happened to celebrate its 20th anniversary just 2 years ago in 2019. My co-moderator, Christelle Barakat, and I are very grateful to the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime for hosting this event and for trusting us to moderate the discussion. In the next 90 minutes or so, we will consider what have we achieved in these past 20 years, what can we learn from it, and we will look into the future to ponder what can we do in the next 20 years. To help us navigate those questions, we have an excellent panel of speakers. But first, allow me to give the floor to our host. And let me start by introducing opening remarks by Ms. Ghada Wali, the Executive Director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Unfortunately, Ms. Wali couldn't be with us today, but she has sent some pre-recorded remarks that would serve as a fair opening for this event.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to open this event marking the 20th anniversary of the Firearms Protocol and the Program of Action on Small Arms, two cornerstones for half of all homicides are committed with a firearm. The trafficking of illicit firearms also provides terrorist groups with weapons and funding. The Firearms Protocol is the basis of our shared responses to this threat. It is the only international instrument requiring states to criminalize the illicit manufacturing of and trafficking in firearms, their parts and components, and ammunition. Through its Global Firearms Program, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime helps countries implement the protocol by providing assistance on legislation, criminal justice responses, and monitoring. In the past 10 years, the program has trained over 2,700 criminal justice practitioners from Africa and the Middle East, Europe, Central Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. To help strengthen firearms control regimes, we are currently developing software to support countries with recording and tracing firearms through their life cycle. Our 2020 global study on firearms trafficking expands the evidence base on illicit arms flows with information from over 100 countries and territories. And we will continue to shed light on this hidden crime. And because comprehensive approaches require strong partnerships, we are working with UNOCT, CTED, and UNODA to address the arms crime terrorism nexus in Central Asia. I take this opportunity to commend UNODA and Under-Secretary General Nakamitsu for their efforts in countering threats from small arms and light weapons, and I look forward to further exploring joint initiatives. As we continue to support the Firearms Protocol's 120 state parties, we stand ready to help all other states join the protocol and implement it. Let us mark this 20th anniversary with a renewed commitment to reducing illicit arms flows. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those remarks, and that gives me a great segue to give the floor to our next opening speaker, Mr. Thomas Markram. He's the Director and Deputy to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs and the co-host of this event. Mr. Markram, please.
Thank you, Daniel. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, who had very much wanted to be with us today, is currently on official duty in Japan, let me first express great satisfaction with our partnership with UNODC on the joint organization of this side event. Our partnership demonstrates, indeed, how the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons and the Firearms Protocol are complementary in nature and character. I would also like to express my warm feelings to the moderators, the speakers, and the participants in this event who have joined us today from around the world to celebrate the double anniversary of the Firearms Protocol and the Program of Action on Small Arms as they turn 20. An anniversary is always an opportunity to celebrate as we look back at the roads we have traveled together since the adoption of the Program of Action and the Firearms Protocol in 2001. It has been a long road and perhaps not the fastest road, but we have made progress since we started this journey. However, today and this week is also a chance to imagine how the future of small arms and light weapons control should look in the years to come. I'm delighted that today's event will allow us to do exactly this. As states gather in conference rooms and on virtual platforms during the 7th biennial meeting this week, they will also reflect on the progress that they have made on the implementation of the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light, and the challenges that they also continue to face. And while states are firmly in the driver's seat in the political processes, I want to acknowledge that it has taken a global village to get us to where we are today. Civil society, local community leaders, youth activists, researchers, and academics, experts, parliamentarians, regional and sub-regional organizations, UN colleagues and colleagues from other international organizations such as Interpol and the World Customs Organization, all have made great contributions towards the implementation of these two instruments. I would also like to appeal to all to continue this important work. Despite the pandemic and its devastating consequences, small arms control is and must remain a priority for global and regional organizations, for states and for local communities, because political instruments such as the Program of Action and the Firearms Protocol must be implemented fully and effectively so that they can serve those who continue to be impacted by these weapons. In short, they do save lives. I'd like to thank all panelists for joining us today, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Markram, for those remarks. And I know that we'll be hearing back from you very soon as we start this panel discussion session. Now, our hosts have a very interesting breakup for us. We will have 3 different areas of discussion for the next 90 minutes or so. One area would be the key achievements over the past 20 years in the fight against illicit small arms trafficking. A second area that will look at the remaining challenges in countering illicit trafficking. And then a third that will explore the linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals, including the important role of women, youth, and civil society. So again, a fantastic program with a panel of fantastic speakers that I would like to introduce now. We'll have Mr. John Brandolino. He's the director of the UNODC Division for Treaty Affairs. Welcome, John. We'll have Thomas Markram, whom you just heard, Director and Deputy to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, and welcome, Tom. We'll have Ms. Karin Olofsson, the Secretary General of the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons. Karin, welcome to you. Ambassador Luis Javier Campuzano Piña from Mexico, who was the chair of the 8th meeting of the Working Group on Firearms. And last but not least, Ambassador Jean-Claude Brunet, Ambassador at Large on Transnational Criminal Threats and the Fight Against Illicit Trafficking of Small Arms and Light Weapons, and who also was president of the 3rd Review Conference. So an absolutely brilliant panel of speakers, and we trust you to guide us through these complex questions and topics. We would like to start each of the segments that we have, each of the 3 segments, with a short video showing voices from the ground. It's a video of testimonials that our colleagues in UNODA in UNODC gathered over the last few weeks, and I think we'll have the first video ready to show about now.
I'm Nicolas Florquin with the Small Arms Survey. Over the past 20 years, evidence-based policies have become recognized as the necessary backbone of international small arms control processes.
Hemos avanzado bastante en el tema de armas pequeñas y sobre todo poner el tema de las armas sobre la mesa. Antes no se hablaba, ahora las armas sí son un problema para los gobiernos, son un problema para las sociedades.
I bring to you greetings from ECOWAS Commission. We in the ECOWAS region have been very, very active in terms of disarmament, non-proliferation and arms control activities. We have had very interactive, very useful and impactful period over the last 20 years in supporting our member states to effectively put in place national processes, national structures that will allow them to effectively implement all the provisions of regional, continental, as well as the global protocol.
When you talk about physical security and stockpile management, that is to say all arms have to be kept safely and managed and controlled effectively. This is the reason why physical security and stockpile management is a core business for REXA. Our mandate is to help our member states to come up with managing and control properly stocks. We have to deal with the management of arms from the import up to the destruction.
This is Salah Idris, the arms control focal point for Sudan, the national focal point. Our achievements within the over 20 years. First of all, the formation and the update of the Sudan law on armed weapons, ammunition and explosive. It has been updated several times. And also the formation of the Higher Committee for Arms Collection, and also the data collection on the illicit weapons that are owned by the civilian.
With the Army, HALO has marked and registered the entirety of the available small arms and light weapons stockpile, constituting over 61,000 weapons. This is the first effort of its kind in the Western Balkans and has resulted in a sustainable, comprehensive and custom-built nationally networked database that will be used by the armed forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Ministry of Defence to manage and monitor their stockpiles in order to ensure effective storekeeping practices, reducing the likelihood of diversion. HALO's project was designed with Mosaic and based on key international instruments including the UNPOA.
Au cours de 20 dernières années, plusieurs armes légères de petit calibre ainsi que leurs munitions ont été collectées, marquées et détruites à 100% devant les autorités ainsi que les membres de la société civile. Cela empêche le recyclage de ces armes vers d'autres groupes armés. Cela marque également notre détermination à lutter contre le trafic illicite d'armes et de munitions dans la région.
Excellent. A fantastic introduction to the topic of the first segment, which again is, what have we done in the past 20 years? What have those two instruments that we're discussing today accomplished? And I'm going to throw that, which I understand is a very big question first to Mr. John Brandolino, and reminding all the panelists that don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to do different interventions. So what we're looking for you is a brief, 3-minute answer so we can keep the conversation moving. So will that challenging proposal, John, any ideas from you?
Well, thank you, Danielle, and thank you for having all these experts together at once is really a privilege, I have to say. But I'm going to focus specifically on the firearms protocol, which is a protocol that supplements the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. And looking back from where we came from, I mean, 20 years ago, there was little understanding among the international community on the need to regulate firearms to prevent and counter illicit trafficking and their use in crimes and armed conflicts. And illicit arms flows were quite, flowed quite freely then, from one third of conflict to another, from criminals to terrorists and back. And there really was no kind of radar on getting the entire international community together to focus on it. So in terms of key achievements, I would say one thing that can't be underestimated is that the firearms protocol really marked a significant milestone and a turning point and allowed member states to awaken to the dangers posed by illicit arms flows to peace, security, and sustainable development. And it's through the instrument that the international community finally recognized in a global way, in a formal way, that illicit firearms are crucial for organized criminal groups to carry out their activities, and that we need to disrupt the firearms flows as a prerequisite to disrupting organized crime. And so now, compared to even a decade ago, we see more legislative responses to deal with the threat. Our surveys from member states show that more than ever, they feel attention is needed to this issue. We see enhanced legal frameworks and strengthened control mechanisms that we haven't seen before, keep ammunitions and arms from being stolen, lost, diverted, and to increase the traceability. And also to equip criminal justice systems to take actions. We're seeing international cooperation and some data exchanges that likely would not have happened 20 years ago. For example, with key partners such as Interpol, we brought together practitioners from across a number of regions for joint operations. And Operation PEFO 2 in West Africa, for example, in the Sahel region is one of our most recent examples, focusing on dismantling terrorist supply chains, while there was a joint operation, Trigger 6 in Latin America, which saw the seizure of over 200,000 illicit firearms and the arrest of 4,000 suspects in only a 3-week period. And of course, we need to follow up on these successes, and not to say that we can't do more, but it really was instruments like the UNTAC and the firearms protocol that paved the ground for this to happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's definitely an important list of accomplishments. And I would like to pose the same question, as a form of introduction to the broader discussion to Tom Makram. Tom, what's your take on this?
Thanks a lot. Just adding on to what John said, I mean, with the adoption of the program of action in the firearms protocol, also the tracing instrument, and more recently, the arms trade treaty, what we have here is we forged a community of practice based on common standards to prevent illicit trade, destabilizing accumulation, misuse, diversion, and related crime dimensions of small arms and light weapons. I mean, I think these instruments have truly represent what we could call the global architecture of efforts that address the nefarious consequences of the most commonly used weapons in our society today. And I think that is probably the most significant shift from where we were 20 years ago. I mean, the POA and the firearms protocol introduced a new arms control culture and norms. Almost every country around the world has tried to introduce and nurture elements of this culture in their policy, in their legislation, in their administrative frameworks. It is indeed probably the single most important achievement of the POA and the firearms protocol to ensure that small arms, these control norms are rooted in society, and that arms control is not just an affair of the military and the security institutions. The POA in the context of the POA, for example, we've also included gender-related provisions, which is also another significant factor. The POA and the firearms protocol have inspired regional and sub-regional frameworks, policies, and instruments, which also have allowed states and regions to strengthen their efforts further in line with their own priorities and also their own realities. And I think from the UN's point of view, to assist states in these implementation efforts, we have established the Modular Small Arms Control Implementation Committee, MOSAIC, which was shown in the video, which provides a benchmark for a wide range of state stakeholders, including states, to translate this practice and the objectives of those key global agreements, with the aim to prevent illicit trade, the destabilizing accumulation, and also the misuse of small arms and light weapons. We've also at the UN established 2 funding mechanisms which provide predictable and also sustainable funding to small arms and light weapons control initiatives. The first is UNSCAR, the United Nations Trust Fund on Arms Regulation. It has provided funding to international and regional organizations, to NGOs and research institutes since 2013. And we supported like 39 projects with funds amounting to $6 million around the world. And then more recently, the UN Secretary General established Salient, the Saving Lives entity. It's located within the Peacebuilding Fund, and it's dedicated to supporting member states to tackle armed violence and illicit small arms and light weapons as part of a far more comprehensive approach to sustainable security and also to development. So I think we've come a very long way in the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Yes, in fact, as you mentioned, providing the framework and providing the kind of the goals and the guidance is a crucial contribution of these 2 instruments. And I'm happy you mentioned how those are being translated to the legislative sphere at the national level. We happen to have, somebody who knows a lot about legislation and oversight on the side of parliaments, Karin Olofsson. Karin, from where you're sitting, what's your perspective on what the achievements have been?
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you very much to the organizers, UNODA and UNODC, for inviting the forum to share our perspectives on this. And I want to take the opportunity to greet you all, dear excellencies and colleagues around the world joining us. First, let me mention a little bit that the forum is the only membership-based organization. We are gathering parliamentarians globally across political lines, specifically related to the prevention and reduction of small arms and light weapons related violence. So we're an organization constituted by parliamentarians for parliamentarians. And actually we are gathering 300 member parliamentarians from 100 countries around the world. What I would like to mention first on this occasion, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Firearms Protocol and the UN POA, and I also think it's a good opportunity to congratulate you actors having spearheaded these processes. I find it's vital to state that the mere existence and application of the 2 instruments during 2 decades is a key achievement as such. And why? Yeah, because this means a recognition by the world and at the global policy agenda of the importance of tackling illicit small arms and light weapons proliferation, and an important recognition on how vital it is to prevent illicit assault trafficking and its consequences. And secondly, following this, I find that another key achievement is that the instruments provide solid, unique opportunities and possibilities for parliamentarians, of course, in specific, but also for the world as such to unite for sustainable peace, development, and arms control. And given the state of the world today that we know is marked by conflict and polarization, adding up the challenges posed by the ongoing pandemic, this need for unity is palpable, and the instruments constitute frameworks for multi-stakeholder action, I find, related to the instruments. And for the forum, the instruments are prioritized in our policy building, capacity building, and awareness raising work, giving also the legal and political character of the instruments, where also the different mechanisms allow for harmonized policy discussions for parliamentarians and also promoting decision processes, also in relation to governments, civil society, and also private sector. Our focus is, of course, on the parliamentary action and also basing our efforts on the key parliamentary roles, legislative oversight and awareness raising. And we can see clearly that also advances have been made in this regard in several of the regions of the world. based on these instruments. Thirdly, a key achievement is also that vital synergy effects have been caused. Although, of course, it's always a complex interplay of factors leading up to advances on the global normative policy agenda. And as Mr. Makram also said, I very much coincide with that. It takes a global village to promote change. But I find it fair to state that the instrument has spurred development and establishment of other important international and regional arms control processes and instruments, such as the Arms Trade Treaty, the Inter-American Convention Against Illicit Firearms Trafficking in the Americas, CIFTA, the ECOWAS Convention on Small Arms and Light Weapons, the EU's Common Position on Arms Export, and the Strategy to Combat Illicit Accumulation and Trafficking of Soil. And also the 2030 Agenda, which we will come to later also, and the United Nations Secretary General's disarmament agenda, not least, securing our common future. So indeed, there have been several key achievements based on the instruments.
Thank you very much for that, Karin, for that perspective. Let me move over to Ambassador Campuzano Pina and see, you've been very involved, obviously, in the discussions at the diplomatic level over the implementation itself of this agreement. So what would be your perspective on how much they have accomplished over these past 20 years?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I think that the double 20th anniversary of the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons and the protocol against the illicit manufacturing and trafficking of firearms brings an excellent occasion to reaffirm how, through multilateralism, we can comprehensively address the most complex challenges and to reach agreement on the common basis to counter them. I would like to pick up on some of the issues that my colleagues just mentioned, but one of them is consciousness about the impact of these arms. If we consider each firearm separately, of course, the danger of a nuclear weapon cannot be met by a single firearm. But nevertheless, the number of deaths and injuries and the damage done to the infrastructure and social tissue, as well as its socioeconomic and cultural impact, because the unrestrained availability of firearms equals to having several nuclear explosions each day. Therefore, and as incomplete or even imperfect as the current international architecture on firearms may seem, I would say that also a very, very important achievement over the past 20 years has been to create a worldwide consciousness that, when taken together, the destructive power that firearms are having each day, it's greater than the one posed by nuclear weapons. Consequently, greater interaction is needed with the involvement of more actors, particularly at the local level. Illicit trafficking in firearms has huge humanitarian consequences in terms of armed violence, high-impact crimes, obstacles to a life in peace and development for the population. It is also clear that most of the illicit trafficked arms were originally legally produced, so we have to tackle strongly the diversion of those firearms. I would also like to pinpoint that with the Firearms Protocol and the Program of Action, we have had the possibility of focusing the international attention and the efforts to tackle this huge problem. On the side of the Firearms Protocol, we had also the establishment of the Working Group of Firearms, who has had already 8 meetings through almost since 2014, if I'm correct. And there has been more than 100 of recommendations presented by all the participants that are very, very important. And I will come back when we take the issue of challenges. Very briefly, I would also like to highlight the importance that we have seen also through the last years of increasing the synergies among all the different actors and international institutions. So I would say that these are more, as well as those pointed out by my colleagues, the important achievements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those words. Let me move quickly to Ambassador Brunet, just to make sure that we stay more or less on time. My colleague Christelle Barakat will be taking care of the second half of the event, and I want to make sure that I don't, push her into a corner time-wise. So, Ambassador Brunet, if you please.
Thank you, Daniel, and greetings to all, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks also on my side for the invitation to UNODC, UNODA for this exchange. And the previous speakers have already mentioned quite a lot of I wanted to say on the key achievements since 20 years and this important anniversary. But I would like to come back to a few ones, and I would summarize to 4 main key achievements. And I would start by saying that it's indeed a very strong international mobilization and recognition of this major threat to the security of our people. And this is to have this recognition. It means, and we've seen that and in the review conference in 2018, I hope this will also continue, a strong ownership of the international community and all the states around the world, in all the regions of the world, that feel really concerned by this threat and participate. And I would say in the arms control area, it's probably one of those issues that is indeed mobilizing the most delegations in our meetings from around the world, because they see this growing threat that concerns them as well as many other countries around the world, and indeed in also involving common threats that are terrorism and organized crime. So it's not specific threats related to specific regions. It's really global. It really concerns everyone in the world. And the previous speakers have mentioned the huge casualties. I mean, we are speaking about 500,000 victims of small arms and light weapons every year. And we have a big impact in the societies. And we've seen, and that's the first point. And the second point is that this translates indeed in the complementarity between these 2 main instruments, POA, ITI, and the ITI joining the POA in adding specific elements related to marking and tracing, as we all know, and then the firearms protocol together. And this, indeed, it's a remarkable key achievement, which because this complementarity, because it's also following the recognition that we need, and that's what I wanted to stress in this complementarity between these 2 instruments, because we need a holistic approach to face the challenges of the small arms and light weapons, illicit trafficking, and the proliferation and the impact of this. We need holistic approaches. And there is, in these last 20 years, a stronger recognition of the necessary complementarity between, on one side, control measures, focusing on defense, stockpiles to avoid theft, for example, or diversion from exports, imports, of course, legitimate small arms and light weapons stockpiles. But the problem of diversion, these key problem that we will discuss during the BMS7, which was decided as the key topic to focus on. All these measures on one side, and then on the other side, the necessary focus on the fighting the networks of criminals that are selling these illicit small arms and light weapons. And this is where the UN protocol also has such an important role, because we need a common base of incrimination between the states, for example, in order to have better judicial legal cooperation between the member states. And so this is the key also contribution by the UN protocol. And as John Brandolino has mentioned, the legislations. So in order for states to cooperate against criminal networks. And I want to add also that it's particularly important due to the fact that polycriminal networks today are so important, important in many organized crime areas, but including especially in the firearms trafficking area. So law enforcement and cooperation in these areas need absolutely to complement the very huge already holistic measures that are being taken in implementing POA and ITR. So that's the second point, very important recognition of and that's why we are seeing in the last 20 years a very comprehensive POA implementation on the ground and ownership at the national, regional, and global level, but also an increased adherence to the firearms protocol. And that's a very positive trend. My own country and other countries joined in some recent years, having before had problems in terms of administrative legal approaches that prevented us to join the UN protocol. We had other rules, for example, the EU directives and regulations, but precisely we wanted to join the UN protocol in order to be participating to this community of actors, and both instruments are very mutually reinforcing. I wanted to say also, as I mentioned, the local ownership and national, regional, and global, I think in the last 20 years has been, and the videos that you have show it particularly, the multiple actors on the ground that are also helping in promoting cooperation and promoting assistance. This, in the last 20 years, has been very tremendously developed, and also with the UN specific involvement, again, from both sides, UNODC, UNODA. I wanted to say also the mobilization of CASA and of the UN system to help countries in assistance. This has been a key achievement. And my last and fourth point is great initiatives and ownership by these initiatives, especially, I would say also, because we always said in the POA context, of course, that the national level is the first important level. And it's indeed, nothing can take place if there are no legislation, capacity building, and the political recognition at this level. But we have seen also great initiatives to bring together countries in the peer community, where they learn a lot from each other and can also cooperate across borders. And that's very promising, also key achievements from these last 20 years. I just wanted to say we highlighted this at the RevCon 3 2018, but also before, of course, how the regional and sub-regional, and the videos that you showed illustrated also how this cross-border between neighboring states and sub-regional and regional approaches have been tremendously developed in the past 20 years, just on all continents.
Right.
And together with Germany and the EU, France has also taken an initiative in the Western Balkans recently, 2.5 years ago, which helps to coordinate the assistance and cooperation to implement a holistic roadmap with objectives, with performance indicators, and that's this structured approach and better coordinated approach with the donor community and with the UN system, and together POA and UN protocol, for example. This is something that is being developed also in other regions right now. And this is something also we have discussed in 2018 at the review conference. And we are looking forward to see at the BMS7 to see how these recommendations on coordination, methodology, but also the very important merit of sub-regional and regional context can be further developed. That's a very also, I mean, key achievement from the past years I'd like to highlight. And of course, in the holistic approach, all what has been said by my colleagues on the SDGs, it's very important, civil society and communities. This is also that is tremendous, I mean, has been quite strongly developed compared to what it was in 2001. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I just want to make sure that this is just the first segment. There's so many ideas, obviously, to bring, and actually, you were mentioning already some or indicating some of the remaining challenges that will be the subject of the second segment. I wouldn't even try, even with all the time in the world, I wouldn't even try to summarize, all the information that you have put forward in this primary segment, just to highlight a couple of things. Obviously, as the ambassador was saying, that these instruments created a framework that generated this holistic approach to this project, and also spawned an entire universe of regional and national level initiatives, some of which you've yourself have mentioned, some of which we've seen in the videos, that mobilized not only political will, but also mobilized financial resources for specific programming to improve arms control and the prevention of the illicit trafficking of firearms. I'm going to leave it at this, even if it's a very poor summary of what you have said, because we'd like to move to the second segment, which I will introduce, and halfway through my colleague Christelle will take on moderator duties. The second segment of today is on key remaining challenges in countering the illicit trafficking of small arms. Obviously, we've seen what we achieved, what is left to do. And if we were trying to empty the ocean with a bucket, it's not good just to count the buckets that we have emptied. We have to see how much water is left. And so I think that's an apt metaphor for what we're trying to do here. We also have a video with voices from the ground to introduce this second segment, and I will ask the host to please play the video for us now.
Hi, I'm Sylvie from the Hungarian mission. What are the main challenges for solve? Emerging technologies, sustainable development goals, gender issues, but I think the most pressing one is the question of ammunition. Why? Because guns don't kill without bullets. It's the bullets that deliver the deadly effects. So let's bring the ammunition under the POA.
Il reste à relever dans la lutte contre le trafic illicite des armes légères, c'est de rappeler aux États leurs responsabilités. Ensuite, c'est d'améliorer notre connaissance des trafics, de renforcer l'analyse du risque, afin d'adapter notre réponse. Et enfin, nous devons privilégier une approche globale en mobilisant différentes expertises.
Moving forward, research needs to support the implementation of international frameworks, for instance, by assessing the impact of different interventions. We also need to monitor new developments related to technologies and trafficking trends. Lastly, we have the opportunity to investigate remaining policy gaps, for instance, the relationship between illicit flows of ammunition and levels of violence.
The disadvantage of the smaller light weapons within the West African countries, especially my country here in Nigeria, is like, it is aiding the terrorists like Boko Haram, bandit, kidnappers, to carry their missions, toward the innocent citizen, and even sometimes attacks, military facilities, the police station and other security agencies.
La República de Panamá está comprometida en la lucha contra el tráfico ilícito de armas pequeñas. Para ello, debemos de armonizar y actualizar nuestra ley de armas. Debemos de fortalecer las capacidades de nuestras unidades para actualizarlas a las nuevas modalidades de comercio ilícito y de esta forma poder también buscar cooperación interinstitucional e internacional que nos ayude entonces a poder cumplir el objetivo.
Key remaining challenges in countering the illicit trafficking of small arms: lack of legal proceedings against arms producers and traffickers, non-registration of weapons during their manufacture, lack of the end-user certificate during export and transit, few efforts to disarm, demobilize and reintegrate former combatants, ineffective border controls, the issues of tracing, falsification and deletion of marking, the tracing manual and the form for reporting, lack of financial support for civil society organizations active on disarmament, especially those of women and young people, poor implementation of UN resolutions and abiding laws, the absence of national laws to prevent illegal manufacturing, trafficking, and diversion of arms and ammunition.
Our main challenge is the political trend against the treaties, the international treaties, specifically the UN treaties. Until now, we didn't exceed the ATT, but national committee formed by the Minister of Interior to give the technical view on the exceeding the treaty. The technical committee gave their view on that Sudan should exceed the ATT. So far, we are waiting for the parliament to be established. After that, we will exceed, Sudan will exceed the ATT.
Important legislation missing in the debate among lawmakers on gun control is the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which immunizes gun manufacturers, ammunition makers, and dealers from liability when crimes are committed using their weapons.
Well, that was a very interesting video, again, with voices from the ground, talking specifically about the remaining challenges. If you recall my metaphor, what's left in the ocean, how much water is left in the ocean for us to empty bucket by bucket. And I'm going to pass on the baton as moderator to my colleague, Christelle Barakat. Christelle, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So as we've all seen and watched, the videos really pinpoint key remaining challenges, and this will be the theme of this, of the upcoming 10 to 15 minutes. I would kindly ask you to please stick to 2 to 3 minutes as a talking time per panelist, because we also have an upcoming theme related to SDGs that we would love to delve more in depth into. So the video really demonstrates key challenges in terms of research gaps, policy gaps, illicit trafficking, and many more. And from the UNODC website, if we look at the firearms protocol and the adherence rate, we see that it is 16% for Asia and the Pacific, 16% for Western Europe, 21% for Eastern Europe, 29% for Latin America and the Caribbean, and 37% for Africa. This really begs the question, how can we better integrate the firearms protocol into the program of actions on small arms? I'll hand it off to whoever would like to take this question. Thank you.
Well, Christelle, if you would like, I would answer. To answer specifically your question on integrating the two, I mean, my experts, I'm not an expert on all the instruments, but I'm told by my experts that, you know, the arms treaty is really kind of if the flow will happen, the firearms trafficking protocol is if there is a flow, what will happen, what types of things. There'll be monitoring, there'll be marking, there'll be ability to trace, those types of things. And then there's, of course, the program of action, which deals with the end user certificates and that aspect of it. So, and of course, it's a very simplistic view of things, but it brings it all together and is really shows you the complementarity of the three agreements. And so I think those things leave a lot for us to synergize on. And we have all intergovernmental bodies that I think can come together. One of the issues, which was a challenge that was mentioned by one of the people in the video, was the issue of ammunition, for example, which is governed by the protocol, but now being discussed by others. So we need to understand how we can make our instruments more complementary and how we can put them together. I think another thing is understanding, and this is, I'll end with this, but the challenge really to evidence-based policies need to emanate from data, and we need data on flows in general. Of course, we have some picture of licit flows, but illicit flows, I think, are more difficult to get information for. So we're starting a process. For example, our Conference of Parties has asked us to look at, send out questionnaires to standardize information flow from countries and also help them. So we're providing help to them to develop the right system so they can gather the information, to look at, to be able to get the information to determine, okay, where are these flows? Who are they coming from? Who are the players? Who are the organized groups? And what are the trends? And so those, and in some sense, coming back to the challenges, the challenge of synergizing our instruments and and also moving forward together and more consistently, and also the need for evidence and data.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brandolino. We seem to have lost connectivity with two of our panelists. Hopefully they'll be able to join us again. Mr. Markram, would you like to comment also on the question? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these instruments have some threads of challenges remaining. I think the biggest one, and I'll just focus probably on four. I think the biggest one is implementation. I mean, it remains uneven worldwide. Progress is not only in a sort of concerted global coordinated effort required, but it's more actions that are needed and done on the ground. You know? In the POA, we're talking about these voluntary and national regional targets. That would be one way to build in some sort of measurability and time-bound targets. Also lead to more national ownership, which I think is a common problem with all of these instruments. I think a second common item is that states have to address emerging trends and challenges, particularly when it comes to the implications of new technologies in manufacturing and technology and design. I think those are common to all of these issues. I think another one that is common from challenges is the need to strengthen international assistance. You hear this constantly, that where states and regional partners in civil society criticize us for this, you know. Sort of that assistance has to be predictable, it has to be sustainable, it has to be comprehensive. There's also this dedicated fellowship training program that the NAM has brought to the POA. That is one way to address this. And I think another issue, which probably is common to most of them, is the absence of civil society organizations as partners to states to fight against any illicit flows of arms, particularly small arms and light weapons. Sometimes civil society are just far better placed to undertake work where governments can't. And I think those just one of those issues. And these are the sort of complementary efforts which can also be looked at. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We seem to have regained connectivity with one of our panelists. Mr. Pina, if you would like to comment, the other panelists were just mentioning how we could bolster or increase the complementarity between the firearms protocol and the UN POAS or POA. Ambassador, you are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. I'm very sorry. It's very, very weak, the connection here. So, well, I think that we are in the challenges, isn't it? Excellent.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, what I wanted to comment on this issue, and sorry that I missed my colleagues, but first of all is one of the challenges is making the fight against illicit trafficking and the diversion of firearms a priority for everyone. This goes hand in hand with an issue which I would consider as a partial success, particularly within the last years, but which needs to be fully understood and internalized by all. In addition to the fact that illicit trafficking in arms is a crime by itself, it is one of the biggest enablers of commission of other crimes. In some cases, this connection should be crystal clear. For example, such as drug trafficking, trafficking with people, trafficking with wildlife, trafficking in cultural property, counterfeiting goods, etc. But I would argue that even the success of criminals in areas like extortion or cyber stalking is hugely due to the perception by the victims that such criminals are capable of inflicting damage derived from their easy access to weapons. So the connection between the commission of this type of and other types of crimes should be looked into more closely. Or in other words, the main condition of preventing criminality is by impeding criminals and criminal organizations access to firearms. This should be the focus of attention for the years to come. We should also take a look on the issue of the rapidly and evolving characteristic of this crime and the access to new technologies, 3D printing, the using of cryptocurrencies. It makes more complicated the fight against this and also against the illicit financial flows. We need to tackle all these issues in a multi-dimensional way, and also in a more coherent and consistent way, and also to insert gender perspective in all analysis, policies, and actions. We look forward as well to the implementation of all the recommendations by the working group, the increase of international cooperation, and fostering even more synergies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And of course, before I give the floor to Ambassador Brunet and Ms. Olofsson to also talk about how we could bolster the complementarity between the firearms protocol and the POA, you mentioned an excellent segue into another question, which is really internalizing the norms of the firearms protocol. And Mr. Brandolino also had mentioned that both of these instruments have created a culture of arms control or of norms. However, as we know, changing mindsets takes time, and there are a lot of actors that have vested interests, such as arms producers, in continuing the production of arms and so on. So how could governments, for instance, incentivize these arms producers to stop what they are doing, or to really join them in the fight against the illicit trafficking of arms? I'll give the floor to Ambassador Brunet or Ms. Olofsson.
So, sorry, the question is for me?
Ladies first,
yeah.
Perhaps.
Sorry.
Excuse me, Miss Crystal, I had some technical inconvenience, so I was I was bounced out just before. Just to understand, shall I refer to the key challenges that I observe, or in general? Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to relate also to the video clips, and I find this an excellent method also on the organizers' behalf to also gather voices from the ground. And from the forum, we coincide with the vast majority of the points raised, including the importance to include ammunition within the UN POA. However, I would like to stress a few complementary points as prioritized. And I think it's important to mention that given the state of the world today, it is highly needed to further increase political will. And in this endeavor, take into full account the pandemic effect in countering the illicit trafficking of SOLV as to build back better, that is to have a more forward-oriented perspective. And it has been demonstrated during the pandemic that the problem of uncontrolled flow of SOLV has been aggravated. For example, hindering national, regional, and international efforts to provide much needed service to the most vulnerable. And this has been reported by both the World Health Organization and the International Red Cross Committee. And it has also been underlined by the UN Secretary General's several calls for ceasefire to silence the guns in the midst of the pandemic is instrumental. And related to the context and in relation to the gender equality perspective, I find it is an urgent challenge also to uptick the efforts in countering the illicit trafficking of small arms to respond to the current pandemic context. As UN also stated that the domestic violence has increased globally with approximately 30% during the pandemic, and UNDP in Southeast Europe has also confirmed that the linkage between the presence of firearms in homes and intimate partner violence is further exposing girls' and women's rights and safety. So in this process, it is vital to ensure political will and momentum. And the challenge I find is to translate the political will to action. The world is not suffering any lack of vital, well-written political and legal frameworks. Rather, the salient challenge is to, depending on the character of the instrument, to enhance implementation, the universalization, to put the boat in the river, and to take action to comply with the various instruments. And on our behalf, we are of course devoted to the parliamentary action on this. Regarding a research gap, I would like to highlight two specific areas where it is salient. First, on the human perspective of SOLV-related violence, the comprehensive effects of victims and survivors' lives cannot be documented enough. It must be strengthened also to show these consequences. And secondly, regarding research, the economic consequences of SOLV-related violence. While vital research exists, for example, the Global Peace Index is stating the overall economic impact of violence and conflict, and recently stated that almost $15 trillion US is the economic consequences of conflict. But according to our knowledge, there is no equivalent disaggregated data for the economic consequences of SOLV violence available. And this would be key, as it would mean a better access to accurate knowledge base, but also it could promote even more enhanced action on the topic. As we know, money talks in the world, and then it could clarify for governments and all other related actors the amount of money that could be saved, could be freed, and used for sustainable development, peace and security, instead of the consequences of armed violence. Lack of financial support, this has been mentioned also, and I would just like to emphasize, of course, taking the opportunity to thank our donors, the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the United Nations Office for Disarmament, the Ansgar Fund, for the support to the forum. But the overall challenge regarding lack of funding opportunities is palpable. There are few mechanisms available, especially for civil society organizations, to carry out projects and initiatives at different levels. And of course, this is vital as to pave the way for more enhanced impact. And regarding the instruments, I can highlight just very briefly regarding the protocol. Of course, there with nearly 120 state parties and more than 50 signatories, parliamentarians have been key in achieving accession in several cases. But the task of the universalization of the protocol is still a pending challenge. And of course, parliamentarians are also active in this area. And regarding the POA, Increased level of and transparency in reporting is a challenge, as reporting is a confidence-building measure among and within states, and also in relation to parliamentarians and the public, the people. So adequate transparency in reporting within the POA is key, as this also gives a precondition for the oversight function of parliamentarians, and so also for parliamentarians and other actors to take informed decisions and implement adequate policies to tackle illicit proliferation regarding preventing and tackling armed violence. So these are some of the challenges that I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Olofsson, for this very comprehensive answer and for really highlighting the challenges encountered with the current pandemic, the challenges for the victims, the challenges in terms of transparency and the universalization of the protocol. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Brunet to comment on the challenges as well, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. On my side, a few brief remarks on our to-do list, on the remaining challenges. I think indeed, as has been said, we have to help all the countries to implement the POA, the firearms protocol. The key is really the implementation and to focus on very concrete measures, because the POA, the UN protocol, that's the part of their success really, is that they are very focused, very concrete. But of course, the comprehensiveness, this holistic approach could create some fear about, yeah, it's too much to do, or how can we do all of this? Actually, if we see what it means on the ground, it can be very focused, but indeed it needs better donor coordination, better in each of the countries, a prioritization. It needs legislations. It needs institutions that do the work, the controls, that do the law enforcement and go after the criminals. But actually, indeed, once it is well organized, well structured, it is feasible. But so the key remaining challenges would be, I would say, is to focus on the main priorities, on the challenges. And indeed, we have to follow also the new trends. But for example, one thing is not new and continues to be a huge challenge. It's marking, tracing, record keeping. And that's very important for the fight against diversion. Because it's also a matter of cooperation between POA, ITI, and the firearms protocol, because it's about avoiding theft, avoiding diversion, and where the criminal networks are active, when they find loopholes and a lack of vigilance, and the system, and a lack of rules and controls. And so so I wanted to highlight marking, tracing, and record keeping, because on these key aspects of the discussions 20 years ago already, we can still do much better and much more. And that's one part. Of course, I meant the connection between diversion and organized crime and the trafficking networks. It's also very important, and that's really important, especially in the UN protocol context, is to go after the networks with all the means that are useful and effective to do so. And that means that's the better cooperation between law enforcement. But for that, you need first in the countries themselves, in the national situation also, to have the capacity, to have the data, to have the people who can, and that's, for example, the firearms focal points and inter-agency coordination, where you can, for example, use the financial means, follow the money, go after the networks through the financial means. And that's one example. but there are others. Of course, we have seen in the way internet plays an important role in firearms or small arms live weapons trafficking. So that means internet is the place where you need to search for. Also, that brings new developments in modular weapons or components that are being shipped. But it's also, you know that internet and the cyber sphere is also the sphere used by traffickers. And that means also smartphones and their communication means. So that means we have means also in technology to go after the traffickers. And that's my third point, is the technology. So technology, we need to follow the challenges, but we need also to discuss with in the private-public partnership about technology used to control and better control and used to fight the traffickers. But to speak about the challenges also, and that's very important, and that's my third remark on the upcoming challenges. They are not new, but they have become much more accurate. Accurate and timely for action. For example, what we have seen 2 or 3 years ago when we talked about 3D printing, experts were saying this is still something for the future. Now it's today, it's happening. In my own country, we remember that the nexus between firearms trafficked and terrorism, in 2015, we had terrorists using reactivated weapons. So this is, we had discussed that during the REFCON 3, but now we have also very much to go after, to look into the situation of conversion, because we are all in different continents of the world now seeing alarm weapons and acoustic weapons that are being legally traded and without much controls, unfortunately, that are being converted to weapons that can kill. And the nexus with the terrorism, we have said it, and we need to acknowledge it again, that it means a weapon that can be used a few times can already be a weapon that can be used by terrorists and for very lethal actions. So that shows also quite strongly technological priorities to follow, as has been said in the video. And my last point is to be able to focus on the concrete priorities and get the necessary resources in each of the countries and institutions to tackle their tasks. Of course, this needs a better exchange of best practices. This needs and cooperation, because we can be much stronger together. We have seen with the Western Balkans roadmap how the work done by the Western Balkan jurisdictions has actually is tremendously made innovation in data collection, following the objectives and the 14 KPIs of the roadmap. And this now inspires the EU itself. So we have in the EU action plan on firearms trafficking that goes after, that deals with the situation in the EU and also in our external action. We have integrated these innovations from the Western Balkan roadmaps in our own intra-EU activities, especially on indicators and on data collection, just to show you that we are learning from each other. And that's the merit of these regional and sub-regional approaches, but also learning from best practices, but also better cooperation is then taking place across borders. And this is key, because you cannot have law enforcement, and to come back to the cooperation to go after networks that are more and more transnational. in nature. It's important to be able to also cooperate in operational terms between neighboring states and in a given region. And this helps also, and I'm highlight also what our colleague Karin Olofsson has mentioned. The political impetus, I mean, the political will be even better translated into budget and legislation and means for the necessary institutions, the more we have operational cooperation in the region and between regions. And that's also mutually reinforcing, and that's something I would list also in the key remaining challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Brunet. You make some excellent points and very interesting examples. And to really just paraphrase what Mr. Markram has mentioned at the beginning, we have made a lot of progress, but of course there is still a long road to go. And the future hopefully will look more brighter. Now, as we will move on to the third section of our conversation, which is between the linkages of small arms control and the Sustainable Development Goals. So we do not have much time left. I would urge you to please keep comments, and this goes to all panelists, to 2 minutes each, so that we can have a small Q&A session at the end. So as with the preceding two sections, we will start with a series of videos showing the linkages between small arms controls and sustainable development goals.
From Peace Initiative in Nigeria, and I'm talking on small arms control in linkage with the Sustainability Goal 2030. We need to empower more women, we need to empower more youths, we need to empower more civil society so that we'll be able to attain peace on our land. Without peace, there can't be development. So the only way for us to succeed in development is for us to have peace.
Predictable rising levels of gender-based violence during the pandemic, domestic violence, child abuse, trafficking, remind us of how important it is that we regulate the illicit trade in small arms and put an end to the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, if there is in fact to be peace, security and safety for people around the world. This anniversary is therefore extremely important to all of us, citizens and nation states alike.
Toxic masculinity, fueled by the illicit trade of small arms, turned the home into the most dangerous place for women and girls. To better understand the role of gender in the reduction of armed violence and organized crime, it is crucial to take into account the intersectional approach that will help us understand, among other things, how to prevent the most extreme form of gender-based discrimination and violence against women, homicide.
Debemos avanzar aún más en hablar sobre las víctimas de las armas de fuego, en los sobrevivientes de los ataques. Ese es uno de los desafíos principales, así como también sacar las armas de la vida de las mujeres.
So as we can see from the different videos, there are a lot of existing linkages to the Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of you in your opening remarks and in the first segments have really emphasized how the Firearms Protocol and the POA have increased cooperation. They have led to unity and led the world to unite, and how they constitute comprehensive approaches to sustainable security and have increased synergies between different actors and mobilize different actors to collaborate together gender, so that would fall underneath SDG 17. What are maybe some other linkages that you find between the small arms control and the Sustainable Development Goals, especially when it comes to the importance of the role of women, youth, and civil society? How can we empower these actors to have a more active role in the POA and the Firearms Protocol? And I will give the floor to Ambassador Brunet, and I would urge you all to please keep interventions to 2 minutes so that we could have a small Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle, and I promise I will be very, very brief. I try, but no, seriously, indeed, I would like to sum up the key point I'd like to make in a very short, in a nutshell, as we say in English, that because what strikes me is that SDGs are indeed very important to have in mind when we are working on POA and firearms protocol implementation. For one simple reason already is indeed, we mentioned the holistic approach and the fact that it is a threat to the whole of the society. And so we have there is this necessary to have civil society, women, the youth, the community groups, the NGOs, associations, contributing to the awareness raising. And for the political leadership, for the parliamentarians, and also to get the data and to illustrate the different challenges for each of the society. So this is already key, the key aspect. And then the translation, that's my second point. The translation, very simple terms also to use, is really to say that's the precondition, not only also to get the necessary political support and sustainable support in all the countries, but it's also for the international dimension, a strong help to get the necessary financing, because we have seen, and I mentioned in the previous topic, that we need strategies, we need to focus on priorities, on concrete measures, but indeed the tasks are sometimes quite huge, and we need the prioritization, and we need the international cooperation, we need assistance, and but the countries need also to prioritize in a sustainable manner in their own budgets and institutions. And so this goes hand in hand. And for that, the international, the UN system, the international agencies cooperation is very strong, and indeed, but and we have made progress in the last 20 years, as we have all said, in the recognition of the priority of this area of action. But still, there is room for improvement and work to be done for this particular prioritization of assistance and efforts, and of also of synergies with when you build up institutions. Of course, it's to fight organized crime. Firearms is one aspect, but firearms and small arms and light weapons control is also part of other strategies, and to follow different sustainable development goals, because we have justice and we have the fight against organized crime, we have the SDG 16, but we have also other aspects that are concerned by this, and health and safety and the development of the society. We have, of course, the gender aspect, the threat of these weapons being used in feminicides, domestic violence, etc. So SDGs to see these questions and these actions in embedded, so to speak, in broader strategies to promote the SDGs will, I hope, be a possibility to give stronger emphasis both in the countries themselves, but also in the international community and donor community and development aid community of the importance of these matters. And my last point concerns the ammunition, because we have mentioned it in the just before. And I see also the very strong progress in the governmental experts group that has been working since the last review conference of the POA on the ammunition subject. And we will soon, in September, have the finalization, we hope, and then the presentation to the whole UN and in the first committee. And this will be quite interesting to see, and the connection with SDGs especially, because I was very impressed by the actual very strong convergence in the international community on the dangers of unsafe and unsecured conventional ammunition stockpiles. And despite the differences that can appear, and in the POA we know about this ammunition being treated in the POA. But on the substantive matter, there is a progress in convergence on actions to be done by the states and the cooperation among states to cope specifically with specific dangers in the we have seen in some countries around the world very recently, even, and in the past years, what tremendous risks some unsafe stockpile can pose, and the huge numbers of victims of explosions of these stockpiles. And it's indeed a cross-cutting challenge also for health and the economy and the socio-economic development, as for small arms and live weapons, but also in a very specific dimension. And this can be also both small arms and live weapons control and the specifically ammunition issue quite important to strengthen the recognition in the Agenda 2030 SDGs with this cross-dimensional perspective, and for some urgent recognition of the needs for financing assistance programs even more than right now. And despite, of course, very productive and very useful coordination that is already taking place, but which needs much a bigger political push. And their SDGs, again, with the NGOs, civil society, and representatives, elected representatives in all countries, to put this on the agenda as such, as a key factor, cross-cutting factor, to be able to meet the objectives in the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. You make a very thorough case for the interlinkages between SDGs and small arms control, especially when it comes to SDG 16. And as mentioned in the videos, there cannot be development without peace. And with that, I would like to turn over the microphone to Ms. Olofsson for your remarks about the interlinkages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Yes, indeed. And I will try to be concise also on this last topic also. Indeed, small arms control is key to the achievement of the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, and as encapsulated also in the SDG 16.4. So, and of course, given the vast human and economic consequences that SAR-related violence entails, that has been also mentioned vastly during this session also. So the recognition of this in the Agenda 2030 is crucial, well-grounded and much needed. And as we know, this was a development as it was not recognized in the former Millennium Development Goals. Women, youth and civil society are indeed vital stakeholders, both in small arms control and for the achievement of the SDGs. Their voices are needed at all levels, not only because youth and women are gravely affected by small arms related violence and hence possess vital knowledge on the challenges and also possible solutions on the ground, but also because their meaningful participation in decision-making processes needs to be secured, is a right for them, and also to ensure more inclusive and more efficient processes. The voices and agency of women, half of the world's population, are still lagging behind, as we know, in international and national policy arenas. And also youth are not adequately represented in processes that concern their present and future. Given the profile of the forum or organization, I would, however, like to stress the parliamentary perspective and situation on this. And we, of course, strive to address this comprehensively in our work. Increased representation and participation by both youth and women parliamentarians, much needed to better reflect realities in national and international policies. As stated by the Interparliamentary Union, more than half the world's population is estimated to be under the age of 30, and in the recent research by IPU, only 2.6% of MPs in the world are under the age of 30. So this demonstrates the shortfall in young people's political representation. Regarding women parliamentarians, in the latest report from the IPU on the topic in early 2021, as of the global share of women in national parliaments is 25.5%, just a slight increase from the previous year. But this is clearly reflecting the need for more forceful action to achieve gender equality in political representation, and this has a spillover effect, of course, when it comes to arms control processes and disarmament. And given the urgency of the implementation of 2030, as we all know here, we are now in the decade of action, only 9 years pending to achieve the agenda for the population of the world. And also, as parliamentarians are key actors for achieving the agenda, I would like to relate to the context also below this theme. As I mentioned before, the global context is marked by conflict and polarization, but also by a democracy backlash. And this is leading to a more hostile environment for parliamentarians around the world. And the Interparliamentary Union has also recently alerted on the situation with increased human rights violations that are suffered by members of parliaments in a number of countries. Just to mention a few: Myanmar, Philippines, Colombia, Yemen, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan. Many of these cases concern actual physical violence against parliamentarians, including women and young MPs. So this underpins the importance to include parliamentarians in the work, both for the global international community, but also for us at the forum. This is a driving force. I mean, not only for arms control, but beyond that, a synergy effect for more democratic, sustainable, and peaceful development globally. And also, a last point on the urgency of the achievement of the Agenda 2030. Although the importance that it is included now in the agenda, but our observation is that it is still a tendency in some parts of the international community to not fully acknowledge the comprehensive scope of the problem of illicit flows of arms. Is it still a kind of fear of attachment regarding small arms control? It is not acknowledged as the holistic obstacle that it is for sustainable peace and development. It is a tendency to perceive SOL control sometimes as a separate, isolated issue, more related to the defense sector, security, and not to the holistic scope of sustainable development and peace. And this, my friends, I think will be vital to also support each other and work even more forcefully together to counteract this tendency. If we are to achieve global, peaceful, and sustainable developed societies, we need to counteract this tendency. And we all have an important role to play in this process. And just two brief last points. Following this, the forum has launched a call for action, highlighting the importance of strengthening parliamentary action to prevent and reduce armed violence. And you are warmly invited to sign this online call for action. And the organizers are kindly sharing the link now in the chat room. So please welcome to sign and spread the word, because together we can also cause a change in this. And of course, I would also like to just briefly mention and welcome you to join our side event on Thursday, 29th, that we are organizing together with the ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly, IPA, and the government of Sweden on the Connecting the Dots sharing. And there you will get an opportunity to also learn more about the possible solutions and actions the parliamentarians are taking around the world, and in specific in Asia and in Africa. So warm welcome to that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Olofsson, and thank you for telling us about the increased consciousness of parliamentarians to these very timely issues and their engagement in inclusive and holistic processes towards preventing the illicit trafficking of small arms. Now I would like to turn the microphone to Mr. Brandolino. If you could please also comment on the question and perhaps give us quickly your concluding remark, as I understand you have another commitment to get. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief. Just to say that, of course, when it relates to the SDGs, I mean, to us, Goal 16 is really a really wonderful achievement, and it's wonderful because in a number of ways, but it brings together firearms trafficking and several concepts. First, of course, peaceful and inclusive societies, access to justice, effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions. I mean, it realizes how arms, small arms, and trafficking of arms can change the dynamics when it comes to these components, particularly for peaceful and inclusive societies. And then it also links these elements with other aspects of Goal 16, other targets of Goal 16, such as, for example, corruption and organized crime. So it also shows that in order to tackle these other problems, they're all interrelated. We have to tackle all of them. So you can't just deal with firearms trafficking without dealing with corruption. You can't deal with it without dealing separately or jointly with the issue of organized crime. And firearms trafficking breeds all of those others. So that to us is really, I think, having the international community recognize that was a great step forward. And finally, I'll just say in regards to gender, you know, of course, that's something that we deal with all the time, particularly in the context of firearms trafficking and illicit flows, and of course, criminal aspects of small arms. I mean, the data is, you know, fairly you know, dramatic when it comes to, for example, homicides. You know, where you see that women are more the victims of such homicides. For example, all victims of homicide recorded by UNODC in 2017, where we collected data in which an intimate partner was implicated, 82% were women. Countries with an above average level of femicide, firearms are used 5 times more often in femicides than in other areas. So we see a lot of connections and effects on women, and we're trying to deal with that, not only from the perspective of victims, but also from the perspective of solutions and integrating women into the solutions and of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brandolino. Ambassador Camposano Pina, since we have you back on camera, if you would like to comment on the interlinkages between the SDGs and small arms control, please, in a brief way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. I think that there is absolutely very strong link between all the SDGs, and we could go giving examples of each one of them. I'll pinpoint only a couple. Achieving food security is threatened when people risk abandoning their villages, neighborhoods, or even their homes due to the insecurity, or when wildlife, SDG 14 and 15, and drug traffickers attack and menace peasants legally producing staple food, whereas the exponential impact of illicit firearms trafficking on women and girls, SDG 5, has been well established. In all these cases, the opinions and experience of non-governmental organizations, in particular, have to be taken into account and included in any policy or program to be successful. Women and youth speakers need to be heard if we want to understand the particular threats that they are living, but also the best way to overcome the challenges posed by firearms. Youth and children must receive the solid message that real power is held by those who don't carry weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for shedding light on the interlinkages with other SDGs, such as SDG 14 and 15, and food security, like you mentioned. And Mr. Brandolino, thank you for also showcasing the spillovers from small arms illicit trafficking on other timely cases. And now I finally turn it to Mr. Markram for also your brief comments before we wrap up our event today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think all the other panelists have covered the multiple linkages between the SDGs, the need for the full and effective participation and leadership of women, the need for more comprehensive mainstreaming of gender perspectives in all these dimensions. So I'm only going to mention one issue here. In his agenda for disarmament, the UN Secretary General recognized that young people were a tremendous force for change in the world. And so we at ODA, in partnership with a whole lot of other interested entities, committed to further invest in disarmament education. And we've established a platform for youth engagement known as Youth for Disarmament Initiative. And I'm particularly delighted, Christelle, that you, as a UN Youth Champion for Disarmament, are co-moderating this panel today. And I'd like to thank all my fellow panelists and to everybody that contributed today for, I think, a very good side event, covering a lot of ground, a lot of material. I'm glad everybody managed to stay with us on this, but an extremely good job. Thank you to both moderators, to you, Christelle, and also to Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Markram, and thank you again for inviting me to co-moderate this panel. It's truly a pleasure to represent you specifically. And just as a concluding remark, between the interlinkages between small arms control and the SDGs agenda, as we know, disarmament is not an SDG in itself. However, it is at the heart of development, and we need peace in order to build sustainable development. It's not just about development, it's also about its sustainability. And thank you for everybody for commenting on the importance of youth, women, and civil society organizations in forwarding or moving forward with the SDGs agenda. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to my co-moderator, Daniel, to take us home. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to Christelle. Obviously, thank you very much to all the panelists. I have to give my apologies to the audience. We will not have time to get to the Q&A. As you can see, we're 3 minutes from the witching hour, and at which point a lot of people need to move on to the next event. So that's one of the downsides, I guess, of having 5 panelists who are so knowledgeable and so into these matters that they, they have really shared with us a lot of really interesting information, insights, and their own perspectives over this process that started 20 years ago, a process that, again, has created a whole universe of multilateral, regional, national, community-level initiatives towards small arms control, the reduction of arms violence, which I think are goals that we can all get behind. And once again, I would like to thank UNODC and UNODA for putting together this event, for selecting such a wonderful panel of speakers, for allowing Christelle and myself to moderate this event. And, this is the first day of a week-long BMS, if I understand correctly. So good luck with the rest of the sessions, and I'll be seeing some of you probably on the side events. Thank you very much. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on your time zone. And thank you for being with us, to the speakers and to the audience. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.